Welcome to Command Control Power, a weekly podcast hosted by 3 certified members of the Apple Consultants Network, drawing from over half a century of combined experience. We talk shop, interview vendors and colleagues, and share what we've learned while operating our technology consulting practices. This is Joe Saponari of CyMac, and my 2 co-hosts are Jerry Zigman of MacWorks and Sam Valencia of the HCS Technology Group. For the freshest content, a peek behind the scenes, and more candid conversation about running our businesses, dealing with clients, fixing tough technical issues, and everything else you love about Command Control Power, we invite you to join us on Patreon so you don't miss any of this great content. Go to commandcontrolpower.com and click support. Pledge monthly, and you can instantly subscribe to the patron-only shows right in your favorite podcast app. Once again, to join us on Patreon and get the latest patron-only episodes, visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support. We hope to see you there, and thanks for listening.
So I have something funny that happened to me earlier this week. I'm one of these people where a lot of times I want to be given the fish. The old parable or the old saying about teach a man to fish and he won't be hungry for a lifetime. Give a man a fish. I just need my fish.
Yeah,
pretty
just
much.
Keep the fish coming. Yeah.
Right. So a lot of times I'll text something out to you and Sam because it's absolutely too embarrassing to put on Slack. Other times in the ACN Slack, if I get radio silence from you and Sam, I go immediately to the ACN Slack. There's so many nice people there that one of them is bound to give me a fish. But this was so ridiculous that I couldn't even put it on the ACN because the question was so ridiculous. So I have this client and she was having problems with her inkjet printer. And it was one of those things we tried to troubleshoot over the phone, and she's an elderly retired client. And so I actually went to see this on site, and it was an Epson printer. And without getting into the nitty gritty, I set it to printer defaults. The OS saw the printer, reset the printing system. And no matter what we did, regardless of what kind of driver we used, it showed that the printer queue sent the job to the printer, but the printer did nothing. And I tried this on wireless. Initially, it was set up wireless. I tried it with a wired USB cable. I thought that would fix it and get her over the hump, and it didn't. It was the same result. And I said, I don't know. I think these are made so cheaply, these printers, that we just need to replace the printer.
So no response from the printer? Like no paper would come out, like nothing would happen?
No, it would just sit there.
Wow. And
I knew it was on the right network, of course. It was baffling. And again, like I said, I used a USB cable, reset the printing system a few times, nothing. I actually didn't try it with my computer there. That would have been something that I could have tried now that I was on site. But we just decided to replace it. And I said to the client, you get really good paper performance or number of print per page, you get much better performance from laser, and lasers have come down in price. And so we can get a really inexpensive one. The client said she didn't want to spend that much money. So we found a very inexpensive, I believe it was a Brother printer, black and white, monochrome, $69 on Amazon. I told her that it should be fairly straightforward to install. She lives in assisted living. And in the assisted living facility, they have some sort of tech support. And I think the woman who performs this tech support charges something like $45 a half hour. So the title to this story is You Get What You Pay For. If you need me to come on site, I'll do it. We'll install the printer. But if you need help, she might be able to help you. Easy peasy. It's just like one cartridge. Just take it out of the box, put it on Wi-Fi. It came with a USB cable. She had the person install it via Wi-Fi. I didn't know this until later. And so she reaches out to me and she said, I think I've got another printer that's bad, or I think there's a big problem with my Mac. And I knew there was no problem with her Mac because it was a brand new Mac, a MacBook Pro within the last year. So I said, that's highly unlikely. Let me look at it remotely. So did all the same things. The printer showed up on the network, on the Wi-Fi network. I go to print. This time I get a response from the printer, and the printer just spits out a blank page.
Wow.
Yeah. And I told her, I have no idea. Let's try removing the toner cartridge, which she did. And she was able to place it back in and pop open the top. And I didn't really want to go any deeper with her than that. So I arrive on site a few days later, and I spend maybe less than 5 minutes with it, look at it, pull out the toner cartridge, and the safety travel ribbon that you pull out like a little ripcord from the toners. Yeah, it wasn't pulled out. And look, I'd be the last person to throw this tech person that provides support here under the bus, but this is printer installation 101. This is something that she should know, just like when you peel off the protective strip off of an inkjet cartridge. It's the same thing, right? So we pop it back in and it's printing like a champ.
Wow.
So you get what you pay for. But sometimes it's the most baffling thing, and then you come to find out it's a real basic thing.
Yeah, especially after the first printer was a write-off, just not responding, just not working. And then you get this issue, you're thinking, what the heck? And yeah, that's frustrating because this person who's getting paid less than you ends up costing your client money to pay you for your service visit. And it's like nobody wins, really. It reminds me of situations sometimes with these software vendors where it's like you'd rather charge Apple or like Microsoft or make the vendor pay rather than making the client pay in a situation where it's not your fault, not their fault, and it's really like Apple's fault or some other third-party company's fault. It would be more equitable to have the big company pay, or in this case, for you to get, for that person maybe to hand you the $45 that they made in the half-hour visit where they didn't actually accomplish the original goal. It's frustrating. So how did you handle the billing on that?
Oh, she paid for it.
Nice.
Yeah. There's just no way that I would take that on the chin. There have been times where I've comped her for remote support and that sort of thing. But this is just, it's her job to chase down the tech that charged her the $45. Exactly. And supposedly, anecdotally, she told me that the tech had spent 2 hours trying to get this thing to print and couldn't get it to print.
Oh, wow. So it was not $45. It was probably, $180 or something like that, maybe for the 2 hours.
I don't think,
Yikes.
Perhaps, but I don't think she charged her that. I just think she just said, I'm only going to charge you the half hour, but I couldn't get it to work.
Wow. So. Wow. Yeah. Frustrating and silly, but I'm glad you got to the bottom of it. And that's the perfect example of like where you just need to go on site sometimes because it's not possible to figure it out remotely. What could you do, especially walking somebody through that who isn't comfortable with the technology?
Yeah, it's very hard. It's like Sam told that story a couple of weeks ago where he was dealing with a client and they couldn't connect to the Synology on the local area network. And the reason why is because the client never plugged in the network cable.
Exactly. Yeah. How long has this been not working? Oh, it's never worked. Oh, okay. Different. Yeah. Now I'm going to approach this a little differently. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. I had some troubleshooting last week. I actually got some support from the Mac Admin Slack iCloud channel this time because it was related to iCloud, although I think this is more kind of general than that. This is an example of a thing where it should have been a half-hour call, and it basically was. And then there's this little like side question like, oh, my email shows up red on my iPhone when I look in Sent. It shows my name in red, my Sent. And I'm like, can you send me a screenshot of this? Okay, I don't know what that is. And I go on her Sent on her Mac and I realize it's got the banner at the top of the message showing unable to verify message signature on her outgoing messages. And not every message, but just a few. And so I'm thinking, oh man, so I thought I was in the clear. All the rest of the questions are answered and solved and everything's great. And then there's this little small question that turns into this big issue that just needs a lot of troubleshooting. So I'm digging into this issue.
Right, like a Steve Jobs one more thing, but in the opposite direction.
Yeah, exactly. One more thing. And then it's a groan. It's not on the edge of your seat. The audience is waiting. It's, oh no. So I start troubleshooting and I'm just looking into it. I can't really figure out what this is. So I click on the Mac, thankfully presenting in this slightly different way, but it's presenting on the Mac. So I can click on, I think I was able to click view certificate. So I can see what the certificate is. And the strange thing is it shows her email address, so the client's email address at me.com. It's a self-signed certificate. It expires June 1st, 2027. The weird part is that the common name of the certificate shows her daughter's name. So it's my client is Jane Smith at me.com, and the daughter is Julie Smith, right? And it shows Julie Smith as the name, but with my client's email address. And the last name has a lowercase letter. So it's not, I'm pretty careful with something like that, not to make a typo or leave somebody's name in lowercase. So I'm pretty sure we didn't do this, but of course clients are less careful in my experience, and she might have done it herself. So now I'm thinking that's a clue.
So you're saying that the name was Jane Doe and the D in Doe is lowercase.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the daughter's name, not the mother's name who I'm working with.
Okay. And so I can follow along at home. How do I get a certificate on my Mac like that? How do you even get there to begin with?
Yeah, it's not something where you're one click away. Do you want to get a certificate? Here you go. Okay, it's all set. There's a few steps involved to get a self-signed certificate and install it in your keychain and use it for your outgoing mail. So she said something about helping my daughter apply for colleges, and I had to sign some forms like e-signatures and things. And I said, this is a different kind of signature. It's not really you're signing on screen with your actual handwritten signature, or you're like electronically signing a document on Adobe DocuSign or whatever it is. It's a different use of the term signature. And I'm trying to explain this to her, that it basically tells the recipient that you, this particular person who is in the from address, is the person who actually sent the message. It's meant to confirm that. And I said, does that sound familiar? Like maybe you somehow installed this certificate? How, I'm not even sure. Like I could imagine that she might have searched for it. The short answer to you, Jerry, is I don't even know it offhand. I'd have to look it up. And I'm thinking she could have looked it up and she could have said, I need to sign a document for my daughter. How do I sign an email or something? And then she stumbles into Apple's instructions for how to sign an outgoing message. Let's just assume she set this up, but it's not set up correctly because it's got her email address and her daughter's name. So it just looks unprofessional. Even if I say it's not going to harm anything, let's just leave it because I don't really know how to solve it. It still just looks unprofessional because it has her daughter's name on the mom's email address with the lowercase letter. Then you think, well, how do I undo that? So I'm looking up these Apple articles about how to set this up, and it's not exactly clear how to remove it. But I figured, of course, you just go into the keychain and remove the certificate from the keychain, so it won't sign these outgoing messages anymore. So I did that, and it removes. And then I, of course, try iterating on that to make sure that it doesn't come back, and it does come back. So what caused it to come back is a quit and reopen mail, and then this certificate just reappears in the keychain. I couldn't tell at first if that's what caused it, reopening mail, but I ultimately figured out that's what was doing it. I thought maybe this is coming in through iCloud Keychain. Maybe it's coming in from one of her other Macs that's syncing, or her iPhone.
Of course, you did try restarting the Mac completely, and that didn't work either.
Exactly. Yeah. Removed it from the keychain, restarted. I removed it from the keychain, and I actually turned off iCloud Keychain. I even turned off iCloud Mail, just thinking, I don't know, is it somehow, sometimes things sync through iCloud Drive syncs certain things between systems. I'm thinking, what could be syncing this back into her keychain? So then I dig in a little bit further. This is after now maybe spent like another, I don't know, I don't want to admit an hour and a half of troubleshooting this live, and I have to just put it aside. So I do a little more research offline. I come back and I walk her through checking various things. So we go on her iPhone and iPad. We look in settings, drill down into iCloud Mail settings, and you can look in advanced. There's a sign and encrypt section, and you can see if there's any certificates listed there. So none are listed there. So I'm thinking, okay, it's probably not coming in from the iPhone or iPad. Again, it keeps reappearing in the keychain, but why does it keep coming back there? That's my question. So then I think, okay, so logically, how does this work? You sign an outgoing message, and what is that actually doing? It's attaching the certificate to the outgoing message that basically confirms that the signature of this message, okay, I'm talking out of my element a little bit here, but basically it confirms that the person that this message is supposedly coming from. Yeah, the signee, thank you, sent this message. And the way it does that is it attaches this certificate to the outgoing message. Then I realize there's another clue. I see the same certificate in my keychain. I see my client's certificate with her email address and her daughter's name with the lowercase letter and the last name in my keychain. Wow. So I realized, okay, so this is like confirming my theory of how this works and my understanding of from research, but also just like thinking logically about it. Okay, so that gets attached to the email that's coming to me from my client. So I start looking back in my incoming mail for all messages from this client's particular me.com email address. And as I'm going through it, I see certain ones show the same error. And I don't remember noticing this at the time, but I'm seeing it now, that it says unable to verify message signature. So I think that might be because the common name didn't match her name, her actual name as written. The email address did match. So I'm not sure if that would be enough of a match, but that's probably why it says unable to verify message signature, because the common name is different. So I realized, okay, I see this on my side too. And I go back through all these months and months of emails, and I see that there's maybe, I think it was 3 or 4 emails over the span of 6 months or whatever. So not every message, less than half the messages she's sent us, have this issue where it's unable to verify message signature. So then I realized, okay, it's on her outgoing mail. In some cases, it's basically attached this certificate that isn't correct for the message that's being sent.
Right. And that signature, you can, I believe in Apple Mail, if it's there, you can turn it on or off. Attach it or not attach it.
Correct. I think so. On outgoing messages, yes, you can.
And I would imagine you Googled how to remove Apple iCloud S-MIME signature, right?
Yeah, I did. And there isn't really good information about this other than checking on the various devices to see if that feature is enabled, if there is a certificate there, and obviously just removing it from the keychain, but it keeps coming back.
So at this point in your diagnosis, are you still thinking that there's some rogue app that's putting it back in after you remove it out that's connected to her iCloud account?
No. So the same way that the signature appears in my keychain on my Mac, which I basically have no control over, ends up there, that's how it's ending up on her Mac, meaning it must be a message that she sent herself that has a certificate attached to it that causes it to keep reappearing in her keychain. And then because it's associated with her email address, is the from and the to in that case.
Got it.
But because it's associated with her email address, now mail is, oh, I see you have a certificate in your keychain. Like, why don't I try to sign this message? And then that's going to fail. So this is my theory on why it's coming back into the keychain. So
very
sure
smart.
enough.
Very smart.
So I'm talking this through out loud basically in the Mac Admin's iCloud channel on Slack. And Braden Slater at Origin84 said that, yes, this is the right way to go. So the fact that he basically gave me a little bit more background on this, gave me a couple of links, and one of which I'd already read and all. But the fact that he validated my thinking on this now gave me the confidence. I'm ready to go back in. Put me back in now. Let's get back on the phone with this client and actually try this. Because at this point, I had already burned through the just general troubleshooting time of I can put some time into this. I have the energy to do that. At this point, I don't want to put any more time into like live troubleshooting this thing unless I have a really good theory to go on.
All right. And if the coach puts you back in, you're going to delete all those messages that have the red dot?
Yeah, exactly. All right. I'm on the right track here. It must be a message that she sent herself that has the certificate attached, that mail keeps seeing these incoming messages from her.
And it keeps respawning.
Yeah, it just adds it to the keychain just like it's supposed to do. Yeah, if I send you a message with that signature, then your keychain would have my certificate in it. So I'm thinking that's where hers is coming from. And Braden even went as far as to say that happened to him at one point and he had to do this exact same process. So I thought, all right, I'm on the right track. I got enough to go on here. Let me dive in. So sure enough, I go into her system. I start with one of her Macs. Of course, she has two Macs. So I've got to basically iterate across both Macs back and forth and fully purge her mail of these messages. So I did a search. I love search in mail, by the way. So I did a search from /clientname@me.com and then press return. And then in that same little search area, I did to /clientname@me.com and press return. So now the search is essentially showing right? Like from and to this client. So it shows all the messages she sent herself. Of course, it's also including messages that she copied herself on, BCC'd, whatever. So it's a lot of stuff, but it's not crazy amounts. It was probably just only on the order of like dozens of messages since this time frame. I also had the time frame because I knew she said to me that whole backstory. I was trying to impersonate my daughter, helping her apply for college, and this whole signature thing, blah, 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 back in the summer. So she knew it was like last summer. And I knew from the messages that I saw from her incoming to me on my side about the same time frame as when that started last June. So I know I only have to go back a little more than half a year, basically. And I went, of course, prior to that as well, but it wasn't an insurmountable challenge. So I went through, and sure enough, out of those several dozen messages that were to and from her, among those is maybe 4, 5, 6 messages that showed this banner at the top, unable to verify message signature.
So they were easy to spot.
Exactly, because otherwise, I don't know what I would have done. I can't delete all the messages she's ever sent herself. So that was really helpful to note that those were probably the ones that were the most likely culprits. So I went in and identified all those messages. I exported the email as a PDF. I saved any attachments to a folder in the Finder. And I deleted the messages that she sent to and from herself. Then, of course, I had to go back into the trash and delete them from her trash. I would then quit mail, remove the bad certificate, which is still sitting around at that point, and then go back into mail, confirm it's not appearing. I'm crossing my fingers and toes and waiting and hoping, that I did get it. So I do all that. Of course, then I have to go do the same thing on the other Mac, rounds of searching and deleting and redeleting and quitting and reopening and all that. And yeah, that solved it. So sure enough, she's not seeing this message on her outgoing messages, whether she sends them to herself or other people. And we're not seeing any messages now in her sent that have that issue, and the certificate is not coming back. Yeah, problem solved.
Wow. You had to delete them also on other devices. So the phone, right?
Yeah, the phone, I didn't have to do anything with the phone or the iPad because, of course, it's all synced through iCloud anyway. So when I deleted the messages on one of the Macs that were actually in her sent folder, which was syncing, they did actually delete from the others. One issue, though, was that there was an import folder on one of the Macs. So there were local messages on one of the Macs that had copies of some of these messages she sent herself. And I guess Mail is really good at looking in every folder and seeing there's a message that has a certificate attached, that it's a signed message, and respawning that into the keychain. So I didn't search just her sent folder. I searched all mailboxes and found some in one of these import folders from who knows why she had tried to recover messages from Time Machine or imported some folder of messages or whatever. So there were local messages that were also affected. Yeah.
And I think in your troubleshooting, and I only know this because you actually texted Sam and I early on in your process, was you actually upgraded the OS thinking that might solve it, right?
There were software updates at one point. Gotcha. I think it was just, going from 12.6 to 12.6.3 or something.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't a major revision. But it wouldn't have solved it anyway, because we know now what the fix is. Exactly. That's worth the price of admission right there. This is why I listen to the show, to hear your stories and then become smarter.
Yeah, it made me smarter because it's one of these things where I'm not even sure who to ask how to troubleshoot this or where to look. But once I realized, here's the other thing that helped confirm this was I went into her iCloud.com. I'm thinking, is there some setting here if I go in through the web and look at, is there something there? Sign outgoing messages or some special setting in their configuration. And I didn't find that, but I did find copies of these messages that showed a P7V file. I think that's the file format for the SMIME certificate. And I did find another article from Apple that mentions this as well, where it says something about sending signed messages to some newsletters will fail because the signature is an attachment, technically. So that was, again, helping me think this through. All right, so I see how signatures work. It's going to attach the certificate to the outgoing message. And I was able to see that certificate attached to the messages when I viewed it at iCloud.com for some reason, even though on the Mail app actually pretends there's no attachment because it's meant to be hidden. It's just to sign the message. So it made me realize that there's stuff going on behind the scenes that you don't really see on a regular basis, and you have no reason to even know about it until this kind of thing comes up. Yeah, it was a fun one.
Now, after all this sleuthing around and getting to know more about signatures, and is it worth enabling this on your iCloud account? I know that normally when you would try to attach this to an email, in most cases, you would have to get a certificate for a signature from a known certificate authority. Otherwise, if you generate a self-signed one, it's not really bona fide at all. And that's what's happening here with the Apple one. It's self-signed. It's not coming from Apple and your iCloud ID.
Yeah, exactly. It was self-signed, so I guess she did it somehow on her Mac. I'm still baffled as to how she figured out even how to get this far, even though it was messed up. Because, yeah, to your point, my understanding is you would want it to be coming from a certificate authority because otherwise, what's the
point?
Exactly.
Yeah. Self-signed means nothing. Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. There was a company for a while that was offering free signed certificates. One of the companies that you could buy. And I guess they were just doing this for goodwill, but I think that's gone away. But again, just a major pain in the neck. Once you start using it, you have to use it all the time and maintain it and make sure that it's performing like you need it to perform.
Yeah, I think it might just be simpler to say, don't trust email. Assume that the person didn't really send you that. Because, it's not going to be perfect, and it's probably possible to I don't know, to like scam it anyway. So I suppose that if you get it all set up and you do have a certificate from a signing authority, then maybe it becomes trustworthy. But it does seem like more than most people are willing to go through. And certainly nobody would be trained in checking the signature or confirming like it really is you just get in the habit of assuming that, I don't know, like it wouldn't make me more confident that it's really from that person. Mm-hmm. I'd rather just assume that it's not, and don't send confidential information through email anyway, and don't take orders through email. We have these things come up where a client says, I've received this fake email to change somebody's payroll account to some other account number. So that's a pretty sketchy request. I wouldn't do that through email. Don't get in the habit of trusting what comes in through email, because for that matter, somebody's own computer could have been hacked, and now, yeah, sure, it's coming from that person's mail app on their Mac, but a hacker is remotely accessing their system. It's like you can't necessarily even assume that this is a legitimate email, even if it is signed by this person.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's a brave new world out there. That's what we say about this.
And some people, they use the Swiss version of this. What is...
Proton?
Proton mail. Well, sign up for a free Proton account or a paid Proton account and assume that whatever they send and receive from Proton to Proton user is safer or encrypted. And that's probably true on one side. If you're going from two users that are on the same platform and using the same system, but all bets are off as soon as you send it to somebody else on a Yahoo account or something like that. So what's the point there either?
Yeah, but it's a good point. It gets into the question of encrypting versus signing. You have to sign the message as a prerequisite to having it be encrypted in sending. And if you encrypt a message with a certificate and then something breaks down in this whole system of certificates, if you do remove the certificate from the destination side, the recipient side, you won't be able to decrypt the email and view it, I think. And that's a whole different issue. I think Proton Mail is meant to be encrypted not only in transit, but also stationary on their server. If you broke into their server, you can't read my email that's sitting there, whether it's in my inbox or sent or whatever, without having my account password. So they have this whole proprietary system that sits on top of email. But like you said, if you send it to a person outside of that system, it's sitting there unencrypted on their side, typically. Yeah, email was never really meant to work in a secure way. So all of this stuff is bolted on and a little bit imperfect.
And the more we try to make things more secure, the more complexities we introduce. You had a very good point. A couple of shows ago, we were talking about using YubiKeys. And once you tie your machine up, your Mac, to your YubiKey, if anything should go wrong with those locks that you put on the door, then you might not be able to get inside your house. So that's layers of complexity don't always solve the situation. Sometimes they make your system more vulnerable, not necessarily to attack, but to being compromised because you can't get in yourself.
Yeah, it's the same kind of trade-off I talk to clients about sometimes. I really wish that we could tip the scales more towards security and privacy, even than they are now for clients and to their benefit. But I'm a little hesitant to tell a client to opt in to encrypting their backup drive, for example, or mine certainly are. Definitely take my own advice on that stuff. But for a client, I always walk them through these questions and concerns where, I wish your backup drive could be encrypted, and I wish your Mac had File Vault turned on. Just a couple weeks ago, you forgot your login password. So, and okay, the workaround is you can reset your File Vault using your iCloud account. There are some ways around that. I do walk them through the pros and cons. And in your case, it's even more extreme than that. If you're talking about using the YubiKey or some kind of hardware key as your only authentication mechanism to get into your Mac with no backdoor, no recovery key, no other way around it, that's placing a very big bet on that system. Even if you have two of the keys, like they recommend, you can keep one always on you. Otherwise, you can't log into your Mac. That would be crazy. And the second one is in your safe deposit box or something back at home, and you're out traveling, and suddenly, like you said, you're just locked out. I don't have any practical...
Yeah, you could be on a rooftop in Spain and not be able to get into your computer.
Right. And now you've got to ask somebody back home to get into your safe and send you your key. And until then, you're not in your system in theory. I don't have any practical experience with setting this up yet, but I know you and Sam have both started to walk down that road. I don't know yet if it's like the kind of situation where, again, there's no password. It's just the key and there's no other alternative. If you don't have the key, it's not like you can say, all right, just get a text message code or something. So I think I'm not ready to dive in head first with that.
Sam and I on another show will have more to add about that because I had my own experience and we can share that across with Sam. More information on YubiKeys to come in upcoming episodes of Command Control Power.
Awesome.
By the way, if anything happens to me, Joe, my wife has strict instructions for you to take the torch and take control of my computer and, not show her all the compromising pictures and just help her sort things out.
All delete. Yeah, that's
Should any danger befall me in my near future. So just be ready for that call.
Nice. That's an honor to be in that position. Yeah. What do they call that? Is it a recovery contact now in iCloud? Do you have that same kind of a workflow to be able to get somebody the ability to unlock access to your account? That's something that we should all be thinking about, what to do in those cases in all seriousness.
Obviously, death would be the worst thing that could happen to you, but you could just be incapacitated. You're home with your wife or significant other, and they're getting calls either from your work or from your clients wanting to have answers to things. They're going to have some understanding, at least initially, but eventually they're going to want answers.
Yeah,
and you got to have some sort of system in place to have somebody try to put things together and figure out how to handle things moving forward.
Yeah, again, in the scope of a client and their iCloud stuff, there's the legacy contact. And in our kind of business planning, there's also the same concept, legacy planning. And I think of the concept of stewardship and how you can ensure that what is my goal? And besides the financial goal of just earning a living, then there's the goals of I actually want my clients to be taken care of. It's part of the way I do business is I want them to feel like they're taken care of and I want them to actually be taken care of, including in my absence someday. What would that mean in practice? And it's probably something like you're describing where there's a planning for someone to the operation in a certain way to be able to continue helping them, having access to the data that they need to be helped and the documentation and all of that. It's a good topic, even just besides the individual concern that we all have.
And I want to go on record here as saying you don't have to cut her a deal. Just charge her full price.
Okay.
To clean up my mess. You could be like Mr. Wolf from Pulp Fiction.
Right. I've got another topic to talk a little bit about here, virtualization. As we do a lot of testing these days, in the scope of Adigy, for example, I have been doing a lot with scripting, including automated remediations. We talked with Ross Matsuda recently. Great conversation to dig in a little bit about how to manage your Adigy or whatever system you use to monitor your clients' systems for issues and then automatically remediate some of those issues. It was a great conversation. And the issue is that when you're deploying something, it could also do some harm potentially. If you set up a script and it doesn't account for a certain edge case or whatever, you can have some issues. Number one, you want to test for this stuff. I have some test systems now set up, and then I'll also test on my own systems when I'm ready to actually do that. And you want to see that it runs properly according to the logic in your head about how it should run, but also you want to see what the client's going to see. How does this prompt look? What's the effect on their side? So virtualizing macOS is really important these days. Luckily, it's also easier than ever, especially with Apple Silicon. An Apple Silicon Mac and Apple's built-in virtualization framework, you can leverage two main options, I would say, either Virtual Buddy, which seems to be the favorite among colleagues, and then UTM is maybe a close second. Those are the two virtualization apps. So Virtual Buddy and UTM.
Okay, stop right there.
Yeah.
All right. So not too long ago, we would look at things like parallels in VMware as the core to this. Now, what has changed in brief on the M1 that we would go to the two that you mentioned?
Yeah, great question. There's also the concept of emulation versus virtualization. Parallels and VMware Fusion can do both. There are still instances where you would want to use those to emulate an OS running on your Mac as opposed to virtualizing it. We're specifically interested, in my case, in virtualization. And Apple has built in this virtualization framework in macOS, I think since Monterey, specifically for Apple Silicon machines. And it's these two apps I mentioned are free. So you can just download them. You can click through a couple buttons to automatically download macOS, whichever version of macOS you want, other OS versions as well. Download them and install them into a virtual machine, all for free.
All right. Simple caveman. So you download this app, you create a container, and then you download a copy of, let's say, Ventura or Monterey or Catalina, and you can put them into these containers? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, that you basically have it. So you open Virtual Buddy, let's just say. You click the little plus button there. And the next question is, what do you want to do? Do you want to use a local IPSW file that you might have already downloaded? Do you want to download macOS installer from a custom URL? Or do you want to just see a list? So I just click download macOS installer from a list of options. Then it gives you the list that I think they download from their site where they probably have this catalog. You can download macOS 13.2.1, 13.2, and then different developer betas, 13.0.
And how about iOS? Is it
not included here? I'm curious if there is an option for that. I think that's possible, but I haven't played with that.
And what about Jaguar? I want to notify money.
Yeah, so here's the limitation. So this list I'm looking at goes back to 12.3 something. They only support built-in Monterey and Ventura in both of these cases, so UTM and Virtual Buddy. And I was able to virtualize both on my Monterey Mac. So I'm still running Monterey, latest version. As of now, it's 12.6.3. And I was able to virtualize both Monterey and Ventura. And the really nice thing about being able to do that is that right now, before I upgrade my own Mac, my everyday driver Mac to Ventura, I'm still getting a lot of questions from clients running Ventura. How do I do X, Y, Z? And I don't have the map yet of system settings in my head. And so I'm Googling where to find certain settings, and I'm copying and pasting that different. But it's nice sometimes just to have the reference, because I can't always find the answer, the simple answer of where a setting is. But also sometimes I just need to poke around and try stuff. And so, yeah, having the virtual machine, having an actual Ventura machine running within my own Mac is really convenient. And likewise, when I upgrade to Ventura, now my knowledge of Monterey is going to start to fade, especially since this is such a big change going from Monterey to Ventura. It's not subtly different. It's called system settings, and it's organized totally differently. So that's just one example, but that's all going to start to go away in my head as soon as I'm using Ventura for several months. And so to have the Monterey guest machine on my Ventura Mac is going to be great as well. There's one little caveat. So if you want to run Ventura as a virtual machine guest on your Monterey host machine, you actually need to download Xcode 14.2 or whatever the latest version of Xcode is. So download that multi-gig Xcode and then actually open it. So there's a step 2, open it. And then you don't have to opt into any of the additional, like they give you the option to download like I don't know if it's like downloading the IDE for iOS or whatever, but you don't have to check any of those boxes. You just let it proceed with the ones that it already opted you into. It's got some certain default checkboxes checked, like the macOS additional components or whatever they call it. Let it do that, and then you can just quit Xcode, and then you can install Ventura as a guest VM on your Monterey host.
Okay. Is there any fancy pants way that it's doing behind the scenes allocation of storage so that it's using less space on your Mac?
Yeah, you've got it exactly right. It's an auto-expanding container, this feature of APFS, I believe. And yeah, as you knew from a few shows back, I was trying to use this whole project as justification for buying a new MacBook Air with more storage and more memory. But because it's so efficient at using storage and managing memory, I have not had to do that yet. So
cue the sad trombone right here.
Right. Yeah. As much as I would love to have the latest generation MacBook Air with M2, and I think I probably will upgrade still because having a little more memory would be good and having a little more storage space would be good. I've been skating by with only a couple hundred gigs free and not really using that, even though I've allocated, I think, 64 gigs of storage to each of my VMs. And I have 2 Monterey tests and I think also 1 or 2 Ventura tests. You can even, once you've got a virtual machine, you can basically duplicate it, like right inside of Virtual Buddy. I haven't tried it with UTM. I think it'd be the same there too. So you can just make another copy of your virtual machine. And it's not using 64 gigs each time. It's just using a relatively small amount of that until you actually need it. So it can grow up to 64 gigs.
Turning into a real nerd, Joe. Now you got to grow your neckbeard out.
Yeah, exactly.
Get that going. Sit tight on your new purchase because you might be able to buy 15-inch MacBook Air that they've been talking about. that might come
that'd
out
be kind of cool. Yeah.
around WWDC.
Maybe I will try to wait that long. Yeah, it would be nice to have a little bit bigger screen, but even just the additional memory, I do get your Mac is out of application memory when I come back to it sometimes when it's been idle, especially if I've left Chrome running. That's usually the call.
Yeah, I'm even getting that most recently on the M2, and I've got 16 gigs of RAM on mine. And yeah, Chrome, for whatever reason, just having Adigy open in the background and starts to complain. So who knows?
That happens with the Unify portal for me. I use Chrome for that, and I use Safari for everything else. But yeah, Safari is great with the Adigy portal and everything else. Just Chrome is required for Unify, and so that's where if I leave it open, I do get that message. But yeah, so there's a couple other little subtle things with virtualization. Virtual Buddy is where I landed in the first place, and I tried UTM just to have that experience too. But Virtual Buddy has the benefit of a supposedly undocumented method in the virtualization framework to be able to boot to recovery, which is essential for us if you want to be able to test MDM software updates, kernel extensions, turn SIP off, whatever, that kind of thing. That's important, obviously.
Yeah, you need that, yeah.
Yeah, so that's something that Virtual Buddy offers that I believe UTM does not offer. It might be a loophole that Apple closes at some point, but yeah, for now, it seems like that is an option there. And I have to just give credit also to Howard Oakley, previous guest of the show, of the Eclectic Light Company, for writing up this really good article about how to do virtualization on Apple Silicon. And you're not going to be surprised to learn that he also has his own app for virtualizing macOS, because Apple has this framework you can just basically tie into. So built around that framework is Howard Oakley's very own app as well. But he recommended Virtual Buddy for the reasons I mentioned, that it does have that option. And then I think UTM might support more guest OSs than Virtual Buddy. Like Virtual Buddy is really just for Mac OS. This is another option to know about. Obviously, it's a paid option. And I tried Parallels because I wanted to also virtualize Big Sur. And I thought this should work. There's a version of Big Sur that runs in Apple Silicon. Parallels is able to virtualize Big Sur. But for some reason, Parallels cannot virtualize Big Sur on Apple Silicon. There's supposedly a way to use emulation with Parallels to run Big Sur, or I don't know if it's maybe if you already had a Big Sur VM, you can do it on an Apple Silicon Mac. But I know that Parallels can run Big Sur on Intel Macs, but it can't do that on an Apple Silicon Mac for some reason. For that matter, going back farther, macOS Catalina, maybe you can use emulation to do that. Probably would require an Intel Mac, I would assume, or maybe they're going to open that up. But in reality, I don't think I need to really test so much in Big Sur anymore, and even less so in Catalina. So it's probably not a big deal, but that's something to just know that not every system supports every macOS version, etc. One other limitation is that none of these options support Apple ID. So that probably makes sense because Apple doesn't want you to be able to just create a bunch of phony Apple IDs to use to scam people or whatever else. So you have to actually run Apple hardware to make an Apple ID. You can't do it in a virtual system.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's been a really good experience. I highly recommend it. It's really easy to get set up. So just go download Virtual Buddy, I would say. Start with that and create your VM and select whichever macOS you want, and it'll install. And it's amazing that it's so simple these days. One little weird part about it is the way that they have you choose the size of the display for the virtual machine is like really silly. You have to drag a slider to the exact pixel by, it should just be a drop down. This is the most common size. Here's 3 different sizes that are pretty common or whatever. But yeah, it's a minor point, but once you get the right size of the display dialed in, it's pretty easy.
It remembers it when you relaunch it again.
Exactly. And you can change it after and all.
I'm just thinking of another good use of a virtual machine. You could come across some piece of software and it looks good, but it looks maybe suspicious. I know we were talking about that data recovery program that came from China that was recommended from iBoySoft, about 25 or 30 shows ago. And so you could put it in that virtual machine and just see what it does and see if it's phoning home to China. And if it is, just delete it and no fuss, no muss. It hasn't contaminated your primary Mac.
Exactly. It's like an isolated sandbox of some sort to be able to test something like that. It's a great point. And it reminds me of probably how a lot of these malware testers deal with stuff like this, where they They install it and see. And in some cases, the thing to know too is the software knows it's in a virtual machine, so it might like behave better. So it's not a perfect test, because my understanding is like those viruses, malware company, they do this, they try to do what you just said, but then the software behaves differently if it like detects that it's running in a VM, just live native hardware. But yeah, on a very limited basis, I'm sure that's a nice way to go. And likewise for running older software. I have a client who I've mentioned in the past that still, until very recently, was still using iPhoto for the longest time, and still until basically a year ago. We had been slowly transitioning them to Photos app, but they had just hundreds of libraries from their photography shoots and stuff over the years. And so we had to slowly transition all of those to Photos app. In the back of my head, still this thinking there's a possibility that they need to open an iPhoto library for comparison, or there was some obscure copy of something that never got converted or whatever, and we'll need to be able to open iPhoto. And you can patch iPhoto and run it even on Monterey, where it was never supposed to run. I'm not sure about Ventura anymore. That may be pushing it, but you can get it to actually run still natively on Monterey. Or like in the future, let's say a couple of versions from now, we're running the next version after Ventura or whatever, maybe it would be useful to have a Monterey virtual machine just to run iPhoto on the off chance we need to use it for reference.
And aren't you still doing your invoicing in AppleWorks, Joe? And your Mac support with Mac Helpmate? So there's another reason to keep those old virtual machines running.
That's a nightmare of nightmares, is trying to do remote support inside of a virtual machine using old software. Yeah, you just created a new nightmare for me.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I